It's great to see all of you with us today. As you know, on Shabbat morning, I'm doing a preface to the spiritual psychology of the Kabbalah. It's a course that I want to teach, but I want to put up on YouTube and on my podcast what I consider the prefatory knowledge that people know. And of course, I can't give you all the preparatory knowledge, but I can give you the basic reading list for those who want to do it. Now, of course, one thing that I'm speaking very gently against is the recitation of the counting of the Omer. And I say gently, meaning everybody should do the counting of the Omer. Everybody should count Chesed for 1 week and Gevurah for another week, and then actually do the permutations of the day. If you are interested in the permutations of today, April 15th, today is the Gevurah of Gevurah. And so most charts about the Omer will give you a meditation on Gevurah, and then a meditation on the Gevurah of Gevurah, and then once done those meditations, you have, as it were, counted the Omer according to a Kabbalistic perspective. My own experience using the Kabbalah, both as a guide to soul work, which is, by the way, our class I'll be offering in a week and a half, and when I counsel other people who do soul work, I don't use this chart. I use a very different approach, many times depending on the individual. So what I will do once I offer the class is offer what it really feels like to use the Sfirot as a guide to your own spiritual psychology. And if you ever want to be a wisdom trainer and you're certified to teach the spiritual psychology of Kabbalah, what it actually means to use this in an agile, non-dogmatic, non-methodical way. I'm going to say that again. I think the test of any true spiritual counseling is the counselor does not come at it with a methodology in mind, with a dogma in mind, with a specific endpoint in mind. And therefore, there is no dogmatic moving from one sphira to another week by week, because the person in front of you might need 6 or 7 weeks on Chesed. And then the most natural place for them to go from there might be Yesod. And the most natural place from there, what might be to go to Chesed. So you have to know all of the different sfirot, in my mind, understand where a person is going organically, and then understand how their inner life has made the connections between the various sfirot. So therefore, while I think it's a really good practice to do the counting of the Omer and count from number Chesed, which is the top of the upper 7 sfirot, count it down to Malchut into the last day, where the Malchut of Malchut is Shavuot. I think it's a good idea. It's a good way to get to know the Sfirot. But I have found in the actual activity of spiritual transformation with the Kabbalistic Sfirot, and especially guiding other people, it just doesn't go like this. So I wanted to give a reasonably thorough introduction to the spiritual psychology of Kabbalah. And last week I mentioned that according to Gershom Scholem, Kabbalah is a mixture or an encounter between Jewish Gnosticism and Jewish Neoplatonism. So therefore, if you, and again, you don't have to go out and read all the books of Jewish Gnosticism and Neoplatonism. You just need to be aware of there, and maybe only read one book. So if you're going to read one book in Jewish Gnosticism, I have the book in front of me. So this is a volume called the Gnostic Bible. The Gnostic Bible, it should be available on used book sites. If it's super expensive, don't get it. There are other ways to find it. But this is a very famous Gnostic text called The Secret Book of John. The Secret Book of John. And now, as scholars have tried to figure this out, is part of what is called the Sethian literature. And again, I don't need to describe all that nomenclature. Where did this book come from? This book was one of the immense number of books discovered in Egypt in 1945, and what was called the Nag Hammadi manuscripts. So an Egyptian had found many containers of these manuscripts, had taken them to Cairo. They were verified. So these are Coptic translations of books that were written in Aramaic, in Greek, some in Hebrew, some perhaps even in original Coptic. They were translated, published to scholars, and when they were translated and published to scholars, people realized there's another whole religion going on, or religiosity going on, parallel to early Christianity and parallel to early Judaism. Now, so then when you read of the early Christian masters declaring that there were heresies going around, we have discovered the heresies. You find passages in the Talmud that says you are now not allowed to read Maaseh Merkavah. You're not allowed to read Maaseh Breshit. So the Talmud speaks about a forbidden literature. We weren't exactly sure what the forbidden literature was. So with the discovery of the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, which again is vast, and I'll just be reading, paraphrasing one narrative here, we know something of the forbidden heretical text of which the early Christian fathers and the ancient rabbis spoke about. Now, as we go further, I'm going to go from a text, it'll speak for itself. It's a brilliant and deep text. Next week, I want to go into the Maaseh Merkavah text, the Maaseh Breshit text. Those mystical texts actually found their way into Jewish consciousness in the prayer book and so forth. Then I want to look for some Neoplatonic text. And then once you have a grounding in ancient Gnostic, Neoplatonic text, you can understand how that was the building material of the Kabbalah. So just remember, the Kabbalah comes into being in the late 1100s, using some of the vocabulary of the ancient mysticism I'm talking about today, but it was just building material. It's as if the old edifice was destroyed. They went looking through the junkyard of the fallen mysticism that we're going to call Merkava mysticism, from the lack of a better term, and they rebuilt a new mysticism using some of the terminology of the older mysticism. So if you want to say Kabbalah, remember, if it says the Kabbalah of the rabbis, the Kabbalah of Avraham, Kabbalah came into being in the south of France in the late 1100s, although it used the vocabulary of earlier teachings of the what we call the ancient Jewish mysticism. Last night I mentioned Peter Schaeffer's book, The Origins of Jewish Mysticism. As I was reading his book last night and this morning, he referred to the secret gospel of John in just a passage. I happen to have it in my library on Gnosticism, so I thought I'd read it out to you. It's a very unusual book. So this is called the Secret Book of John, or the Apocrypon of John, and I'll read passages to you. So part of what it claims to be is it starts with an alternative creation story. The Father of all, called the One, the invisible Virgin Spirit, the Divine Mother, forethought of all thought, called Barbello, called Mother, Father, First Human, Holy Spirit, Triple Male. This is very common of these texts, is they list adjectives after each other. So Barbello, I can't help but thinking bar means son. Bel is an ancient word for God, and the consonant L is also. So son of, daughter of, Bel, the god. It's very hard to unpack this. This is something that is very common in this ancient literature, is compressed words about God, and it is very difficult to recover what they actually meant. Now, scholars are debating this. I'm not going to bring in the debate, other than Barbello we don't seem to know exactly what the term means. The divine child, self-conceived, the anointed, the four heavenly illuminaries, Harmozel, Oriael, Daveithai, Elet, afterthought, a heavenly aeon, sent as a revealer with connections to forethought, Sophia, and Eve. So notice we have forethought, which is pro-noia, noia. So noia is thinking. We have then afterthought, epinoia, and we have Sophia, which means wisdom. We have pleroma, which means the fullness of thought. And as you'll see in just a moment, we're going to have mindlessness which is apanoia. So clearly the author is working with different kinds of knowledge and then giving them names in this myth. We have Geradamos, the heavenly stranger, the heavenly strange Adam. Seth, the heavenly son of Geradamos, whose offspring are the Sethian Gnostics, meaning those people who knew these secrets called themselves Sethian Gnostics. meaning Gnostics in the tradition of Seth, who knew the things that I'm sharing with you now. All this takes place in the secret book of John, in order that when the Spirit comes down from the holy realms, it may raise up the seed and heal it of what it lacks, and the entire realm of fullness may be holy and lacking in nothing. Ultimately, then, this is the author interpolating of the book, God saves and is saved, and with the God of all those called the offspring of Seth, who participate in light and wisdom. Thus, divine wisdom, personified as Sophia, is finally vindicated, and the glorious fullness of the divine is realized. So by the end of this book that we're not going to get to in our brief time this morning, there's a great tragedy that happens with Sophia. She's vindicated toward the end. But my interest is reading to you an ancient book discovered in the Nag Hammadi manuscripts that seems to go back no earlier than the 1st or 2nd century CE, an alternative Genesis story that sees reality completely differently. Okay, and again, I'll pick a few phrases of the book. One day when John, the brother of James, the son of Zebedee, went up to the temple, it happened that a Pharisee named Aramanios came up to him and said to him, "Where's your teacher whom you followed?" And John said, "He's returned to the place from which he came." The Pharisee said to him, "This Pharisee has deceived you badly, filled your ears with lies, closed your minds, and turned you from the tradition of your parents." When I, John, heard this, I turned away from the temple and went to a mountainous and barren place. I was distressed, and I said, "How was the Savior selected? Was he sent into the world by his Father? Who is his Father who sent them? What kind of eternal realm shall he go to? What was he saying when he told us, 'The eternal realm to which you shall go is modeled after an incorruptible realm'?" But he did not teach us what kind of realm this is. What you have here is the list of questions that the early Christians had. So how are these questions uttered? That a spirit came to John and said, "You never got these questions answered, and you need to get these questions answered." So the author of this text is listing the questions of the early church. The author is listing the questions of the early church. The moments opened up and the world shook. I was afraid and I looked, and I saw within the light of a child standing by me. And as I was staring, it seemed to be an elderly person. It's changed again to the appearance of a youth. Not that there were several figures before me. Rather, there was a figure with several forms within the light. These forms appeared through each other, and the figure had 3 forms. If you've seen the end of 2001: Space Odyssey, now you know where they got the inspiration, meaning the light in the bubble going aged and young, all time captured in one. The figure said to me, "John, John, why are you doubting? Why are you afraid? Are you not familiar with this figure? Do not be faint-hearted. I am with you always. I am the Father. I am the Mother. I am the child. I am the incorruptible one. I am the undefiled one. And now I have come to teach you what is, what was, and what will come to be, that you may understand what is invisible and what is visible, and to teach you about the unshakable race of perfect humankind. Now lift your head that you may understand the things I shall tell you today, that you may relate them to your spiritual friends who are from an unshakable race of perfect humankind." Now, these are the Gnostics. They understood themselves to be people who, as it were, perfect descendants from Seth, who could see, you'll see in a moment, in a world of great darkness and chaos, but they could see the truth. And for some reason, they were essential for the truth ultimately to be revealed. Notice, by the way, when what we're going to call God, identify God's self as Father and Mother and child. So a few words about this one. I'm skipping a little bit. It is illimitable, since there's nothing to limit it. Unfathomable, since nothing can fathom it. Immeasurable, since nothing can measure it. Invisible, because it can't be seen. Eternal, because it exists eternally. Unutterable, since nothing could comprehend it to utter it. Unnameable, since there is nothing before it to give it a name. The one is the immeasurable light, pure, holy, immaculate. The one is unutterable and perfect in its incorruptibility. Not that it is part of perfection or blessedness or divinity. It is much greater. It is not corporeal, but not incorporeal. It is not large nor small. It is impossible to say how much is it, what kind is it. No one can understand it. So this author is speaking against Aristotelian philosophy, against some parts of Platonic philosophy, where the question of, well, everything is a kind. And he said there is no kind. It is the ultimate kind. The one is a realm that gives realm, life that gives life, a blessed one that gives blessedness, a knowledge that gives knowledge, a good one that gives goodness, mercy that gives mercy and redemption, grace that gives grace. Not that the one possesses this, rather it is the one gives immeasurable and incomprehensible light. What can I tell you about this? Its eternal realm is incorruptible, at peace, dwelling in silence, at rest before everything. So it goes on to describe this one that, of course, is what Tillich would call the God beyond God. So we have this in this ancient Gnostic text called the Secret Apocryphal of John. Then it says, this God, this one beyond one, reflects on his image everywhere and sees in it the spirit of the spring of spirit, and becomes enamored of his luminous water. For his image is in the spring of pure luminous water surrounding him. The Father's thought became a reality, and she who appeared in the presence of the Father in shining light came forth. So the pure being, contemplating itself, bore forth another being whom the text refers to as she. She is the first power who preceded everything and came forth from the Father's mind as the forethought of all her. Her light shines like the Father's light. She, the perfect power, is the image of the perfect and invisible Virgin Spirit. If you want to see the biblical antecedent to this idea of God birthing the feminine, go to Proverbs chapter 8. Proverbs chapter 8, you have a very similar story there called Chokhmah, called wisdom, Sophia in Greek. And you can see that this Gnostic myth resonates with the myth in Proverbs chapter 8. She is the first thought, the image of spirit. She has become the universal womb, for she precedes everything. The mother, father, the first human, the Holy Spirit, the triple male, the triple power, the androgynous one with three names, the eternal realm among invisible beings, the first to come forth. So this is how Barbello is translated. Barbello asked the original invisible Virgin Spirit to give her foreknowledge, and the Spirit consented. So now even Barbello has a separate spirit. Now you can see something of a Neoplatonic scheme. The one produces Barbello, Barbello produces spirit that she can talk to. She talks to the Spirit and says, I want to bear something else. So like the one in contemplation of itself produces Barbello, Barbello communicates with its own spirit, now somewhat separate, to create yet another level of being. When the Spirit consented, foreknowledge appeared and stood by forethought. Now, this is not, when we say pronomia, don't think of before and after. It's something like before thought, that which exists before thought, pronomia. Foreknowledge has glorified the Spirit and the Spirit's perfect power. Barbello, because of her foreknowledge, had come into being. Now, Barbello then actually produces pronomia or forethought. She asked again to be given incorruptibility, and the Spirit consented. When the Spirit consented, incorruptibility appeared and stood by thought and foreknowledge. Now she has, as it were, quote unquote, two offspring. When Spirit consented, incorruptibility appeared, stood by thought and foreknowledge, Noah and pronomia. Incorruptibility glorified the invisible one and Barbello. Because of her, they had come into being. She has to be given life eternal. The invisible Spirit consented. Goes on and on. She has to be given truth. The invisible Spirit consented. Truth appeared. So now there are all these many, many different layers of being that Barbello, the first daughter of the divine, brings into being with the consent of her own spirit. This is a very, very Neoplatonic scheme of being unfolding by its own inner power. So we talk more about the conception of Barbel. So now a question comes up on page 145 in this text. The child asked to be given a mind as a companion to work with, and the Spirit consented. A mind appeared and stood by the anointed and glorified Spirit in Barbello, and all these things came into being in silence. Mind wished to create something by means of the word of the invisible Spirit. It became reality and appeared with mind and light glorifying it. Word followed will. The anointed self-conceived God created everything by the word. Life eternal, will, mind, foreknowledge stood together and glorified the invisible Spirit and Barbello, for they became her and they came into being. So now we all of a sudden see it's hard not to call this a realm of angels, but thought has now been broken down into very different kinds of thought: will, thought, knowledge, etc. I don't know, but as I was reading this, I thought to myself, something bad's going to happen here. You can't have this complete array of thinking beings, each having their own distinct thinking and each able to procreate anything that they wanted. The child came forth through forethought. The invisible virgin set the true self-contained God over everything. Goes on and on. Now we have the four luminaries. It says the luminaries are will, thought, and life. The four powers are understanding, grace, perception, and thoughtfulness. Grace dwells in the eternal realm of the luminary Harmotzel, who's the first angel, who has grace, truth, and form. The second luminary is Oroiael, who is over the second eternal realm, afterthought, perception, and memory. The third luminary is Davethai, who's been appointed over the third realm, and he has understanding, love, and idea. The fourth realm is perfection, peace, and Sophia. Now, from all this going on, the Virgin Spirit named the human Geradamas and appointed Geradamas as to the first eternal realm with the great self-conceived, the anointed, the first luminary. Geradamas spoke and glorified and praised the invisible being by saying, "Because of you, everything has come into being, and to you everything will return. I praise and glorify you, the self-conceived, the eternal realms. The three, Father, Mother, Child, and perfect power." Geradamas appointed his son Seth to the second eternal realm. So these heavens that begin so simply are now a ramified, rarefied angelic realm. And then what happens? Now Sophia, who's the wisdom of afterthought, who constitutes an eternal realm, conceived of a thought from herself with the conception of the invisible Spirit and knowledge. She wanted to bring forth something like herself without the consent of Spirit, who had not been given approval, without her partner, and without his consideration. Remember, Sophia's spirit is her partner. She says, I want to do something by myself, not with my spirit. The spirit, who's understood as male, maybe even only grammatically, the male did not give approval. She did not find her partner, whom she considered there without Spirit's consent. She gave birth, and because of this invisible power within her, her thought was not an idle thought. Something came out of her that was imperfect and different in appearance, for she had produced it without her partner. It did not resemble its mother and was misshapen. When Sophia sought what her desire had produced, it changed into the figure of a snake and the face of a lion, and its eyes were like flashing bolts of lightning. She cast it away from her outside that realm so that none of the immortals would see it. She had produced it ignorantly. She surrounded it with a bright cloud, put a throne in the middle of the cloud, so no one would see it but the Holy Spirit, who is called the Mother of Living. She named her spirit Yalda Ba'ot. Yalda Ba'ot is the first ruler who took great power from his mother. He left her, moved away from the place she was born. He took control and created for himself other realms, luminous fires which still exist. He mated with mindfulness in him and produced authorities for himself. The first is called Ataot, whom the generations call the reaper. The second is Harmas, who is the jealous eye. The third is Kalila Umbri. The fourth is Yabel. The fifth is Adonaios, who is called Savaot. The sixth is Cain, whom the generations call the son. The seventh is Abel. The eighth is Abrisim. The ninth is Yovel. The 10th is Amorpiel. The 11th is Melcher Adonim. The 12th is Belias, who is over the depth of the underworld. Yebaot stations 7 kings, one for each sphere of heaven, to reign over the 7 heavens. Now it gets a little bit darker here. Yaldabaoth shared his fire with them, but he did not give them any power of the light. When light is mixed with darkness, it makes darkness shine. When darkness is mixed with light, it dims the light. It becomes neither light nor darkness, but rather gloom. This gloomy ruler has 3 names: Yaldaot, Sakla, and Samael. He is the wickedness in his mindfulness, and that is in him. He said, I am God, and there is no other God but me, since he did not know where his own strength come from. The ruler created 7 powers for themselves. The powers created 6 angels each. There are 665 angels. These are their names and their corresponding experiences. And this is where we get into a whole litany of the divine names. Let me just summarize a little bit what happens here. They don't have enough power to shine on the earth at all times. Only a fifth of the light can shine. So at any given time, you might say earth is ruled over by a gloomy, despondent, evil God, and that is the God that rules at a certain time. So you have this incredible narrative in the secret Gospel of John and other narratives that are next to it. I've read a little bit before, a little bit after. But you can see that if we all here are a gathering of Sethian Gnostics, and we're trying to wonder why things go so badly, we try to understand the evil in the world, why war would break out somewhere, why genocide would break out somewhere else. What is it? Is that these lower gods of the Yaldabaoth, they take over different realms, they create false angels, they have an angel over every day of the year. As the spiritual globe goes around, a deep, gloomy darkness takes over and people go crazy. People start acting according to a law that is not a moral law. People become spiritually confused. They think right is wrong and wrong is right. They don't understand anything going around them. All they have is hatred. So when you go through these books and you try to understand history, you say, that's exactly what happens. All of a sudden, something happens where a group of people don't know right, don't know wrong, don't know fact, don't know fiction, have no noia, have no mind. They become mindless, and in their mindlessness, they get infected by a kind of fury of ignorance and want to destroy everything around it. Now, from the Gnostic point of view, after you ask yourself for a moment, does this describe history? Is this what it's actually like being a human being? So I want you to understand the power of Gnosticism. One theory is there's a God above who permits these things to happen, who can make it all stop, but who chooses not to. That's where we end up with monotheism. There is one God, there's one power who sees all the evil, can stop it at any time, but who chooses not to in order to give us free will. That has never worked for me. I never believed it. I thought that was a facile, silly comment. Just as a kid growing up, 11, 12 years old, when I first heard it, I thought to myself, yeah, well, that's not true. And whatever I heard about why evil happens in the world, and many of you know, I saw an intense, small evil way too young growing up in a rough neighborhood. But I saw it at the wrong time. I saw it 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. And, those are images I can't get out of my head about why people could be so violent, so evil, so merciless. I truly did not understand where it came from. When I was a kid getting beat up by gangs, I would see a hatred in their eyes that was unfathomable. I mean, I remember it to this very day. So I thought to myself, so when I would hear, oh, there's a God in charge, your suffering will make you more noble. It was just words. It was worse than words. It was lying words. So I never found a faith. I know I'm Jewish. I go to synagogue, had a bar mitzvah, be a good Jew, know the history of Israel, know the Jewish tradition. So I knew all this, and for reasons I think for myself, I wanted Judaism to be a source of ethics. I didn't ever really understand the great contradiction between forces of evil and forces of good within, as the Yetzer Hara versus the Neshama, and how that got played out. Meaning, it's as if everything I ever experienced, I forgot about because I just wanted Judaism to be ethics. And so I read Dennis Prager's book, 8 Questions on Judaism. It was convincing me till I tried to teach it, and I realized I couldn't. And at the same time, as you know, I had in high school a teacher that in many ways brought me into spiritual and Gnostic depths. I had two different religious systems in which I was living. It all came together when I was a junior in college and discovered the Kabbalah. So when I discovered the Lurianic Kabbalah named evil. It wasn't afraid to say there are evil things that exist. There is a Sitra Achra. It takes people over. I never heard or read anybody say that. So this idea, now for those who prefer something more benign, there's a good God in charge. Everything is by the hand of God. There's a mystery behind everything. It's all going to work out in the end. Just trust God. There's a plan. This might not be the rabbi for you. Maybe I do a good enough job that you'll still hang in there, but this is not how I see the world. I couldn't name how I saw the world until I discovered the Kabbalah. And the Kabbalah, by the way, the Kabbalists, including Isaac Luria, as far as we know, Isaac Luria knew of these books. If not this one, he knew of the ancient Gnostic literature. There's internal evidence that he had discovered these books in Egypt. Don't forget where Isaac Luria grew up. Isaac Luria grew up where these books might have been extant, which means there are other buried copies that he found his way into. He arrives in Eretz Yisrael in 1570 and shakes up the town of Tzfat because he's bringing a Gnostic Kabbalah on top of the non-Gnostic Kabbalah of Isaac Cordovero. He dies very young in 1572, but when Isaac Luria dies, he leaves behind this huge corpus of teaching, nothing written down. And now the question for the early Kabbalists was, or the medieval Kabbalists, what do we do with Isaac Luria? So that's when we had the development of Lurianic Kabbalah, one stream of which has gone into Hasidism. So today I wanted to give you just a little taste of what we mean by Gnosticism. I'm reading from a book that I think is available, the Secret Letter of John, or the Apocrypon of John. I think it's all over the internet. I want you to understand the power of Gnosticism, because if you put the mythic part aside and just understand it as a kind of a spiritual poetry, it does have a certain power to it. The question is, what do we do next? Meaning, what do we do with the evil within us and the evil in the world, because it is real? It is not God not looking. It is God not saying, well, I'll permit this, but I won't peer that. It has a whole different understanding of evil in the world. So I want everybody to understand that before we go into the Kabbalah and discover the Sitra Achra and these other disturbing notions of primal evil and the divine. And I want us next week to go into something of the Neoplatonic thought, which has a whole different way of understanding human knowledge. We have Noia several times in this text. We'll have another text that will discuss Noia in different ways. And I'll try to, maybe by our third talk, we'll get into some Kabbalah. All right, so this is my presentation on some of the Gnostic pre-Kabbalistic ideas of Gnosticism that seem to run in parallel with early Judaism and early Christianity. And we'll continue with the time next week. I will now take